Thank you for joining us for the day. It's been a very packed day, and I know that we're trying to fit a lot into a one-day conference, so thanks for your patience with our quick movement. I'm Doug Linkhart. I'm president of the National Civic League and a recovering politician. I was there for 18 years in local and state politics in Colorado. And, you know, at the National Civic League, we see a lot of threats to local democracy, and I know that many of you are working to combat those threats. I count 5, and let's see if I can remember all 5. But state preemption is certainly a big one. Local control is king in our field. And of course, there are a lot of good activities at the state level too in many states where they're doing good democratic things. Number 2 would be interference with voting and elections, and certainly you're well familiar with that over the past several years, and conspiracy theories and that kind of thing. And disruption of democratic activities, whether it's, ranging from incivility all the way to, the January 6th type violence. And many states have now done civility pledges because peace begins at home. And if local officials can exhibit civility and have visitors, residents who come to their meetings be part of that civility, that helps start the process. Pushback against equity efforts. I know that many of you have probably seen this over the past couple of years, and we work with a lot of city managers who have to balance different sides in their work, and they're seeing increasing amounts of sort of, generally a minority voice or a fringe voice pushing back against their efforts, and they compromise their language in many cases, but other cases they stand their ground. And then finally, hate-based violence, which I know you're familiar with as well. So against those threats are many local efforts, like the one some of you heard about in the last session that was in this room on civic journalism, and so many of the democracy efforts that you're involved in. The mapping process is something that we're very excited about. And personally, I'm excited about it because I'm seeing the forest, not the trees. I know that the devil's in the details and the weeds and the work that we're doing to make sure that it's accurate. And thank you to Carolyn and Rachel and Holland and Matt and Nick. But there's also the forest. And to think that there are 10 or 20 or maybe 50,000, Carolyn, organizations out there promoting more democratic practices, helping to save democracy, protect and enhance democracy around the country is heartwarming. We see that with our All America Cities programs, and we feel that at the local level that democracy is in pretty good shape. There are many threats, of course, but there is more trust at the local level, more trust in government, more trust in journalism, and because of those efforts of the 10,000. And it would be wonderful to measure the impact, right? If we could see the collective impact of those 10,000 plus organizations. But I think we are seeing that. And it's hard to put our finger on because media is also dispersed and there's no one messenger. But it's happening. And I personally feel that we're in a new progressive era, that it is happening, that we're seeing what happened at the turn of the other century happening again, which is starting with a lot of nonprofit activities working on democracy. So we have 2 speakers, and it's going to be more of a give and take kind of panel. Virginia Kase Solomón is CEO of the League of Women Voters, and she is the past chief operating officer for Kase, which is an immigrant rights organization, and she's also been active with many other nonprofit organizations as a manager. And she's been there 5 years in your present role.
Yes.
At the League of Women Voters. And then Michael D. Smith, who is the CEO of AmeriCorps, and he's been in his position 2 years, 2.5, close to 3.
2, no, just 2.
Just 2.
Feels sometimes long.
2021. Nominated by President Biden to run AmeriCorps. And in his past life, he was special assistant to President Obama and oversaw the My Brother's Keeper program with that president, and then has done many other things in his life that are, some of which are in the bios that you have on your program. So I'm going to step over here, and I'm hoping that this mic now works, and just ask each of you to talk a little bit about the challenges that you're seeing in the field, the work that your foot soldiers, if you will, around the country are doing. What kinds of challenges are you facing, Virginia?
Challenges in the field right now, I think one of the things for us, we're a democracy and voting rights organization, and we sit at the center of gender justice and democracy. And so seeing the attacks that women in particular and people who can get pregnant in this country have been facing has been had a huge impact on folks. I want to name that first. I think one of the challenges, though, just from a civic engagement standpoint, is the rollbacks to voting rights in this country at the state level, in particular, have been really harmful for people being able to engage civically. We have states in this country where third-party voter registration, for example, is illegal. It has been criminalized in some places. Something that is as important as helping new citizens, for example, newly naturalized citizens, be able to become registered to vote. There is also just around people volunteering to become poll workers. There's a fear because of violence. People are much more apprehensive about engaging in the voting process as a whole because they're fearful that they will be targeted. And we've seen this, is not a new phenomenon. It certainly happened in the last election. But what it has done is created a chilling effect for everyday people who want to engage civically, but now are fearful that that they physically could be targeted or the victim of doxing, for example. And so there are some challenges that I think big challenges that we have to overcome.
Sure. Okay. Michael?
Well, good afternoon. It's good to be here, see so many friends. Just for context, AmeriCorps, for those of you who don't know, is a federal agency for volunteering and service. We are celebrating 30 years. AmeriCorps was founded in 1993. Our symposium is actually going on right now, so I'm wearing my AmeriCorps socks today. We should sell them. And so today we have about 200,000 AmeriCorps members and AmeriCorps senior volunteers that are serving in about 40,000 locations all across this country. And just catching up with a few friends, including Virginia, we realize that there are lots of AmeriCorps connections. So often folks know Boys and Girls Club, or they know the nonprofit that you ran in Hartford, or they know City Year, but they don't realize that what is fueling so much of the human capital solutions for the social sector is AmeriCorps. And so when I think about challenges from our perspective, there are a couple different things. During the pandemic, I think AmeriCorps really showed how we show up. During challenging times when the going gets tough, AmeriCorps and America gets tougher, we never closed our doors. When teachers had to figure out what is this Zoom thing, AmeriCorps members were right there alongside with them. When city leaders weren't sure how they were going to run testing and vaccination lines, AmeriCorps members were right there. When our food pantries were overwhelmed, AmeriCorps members were there showing up in amazing ways. And so I think coming out of this pandemic, we really showed not only the power and strength of AmeriCorps, but that whole idea that de Tocqueville talked about, this American exceptionalism when it came to service and giving back in the 1800s, it still exists. No matter how much folks want to talk about individualism, that still exists. But I'll also tell you, it did expose some challenges. For AmeriCorps, for instance, for the United States military, we struggled a bit with recruitment. And we think it's a couple different reasons. One, AmeriCorps members serve in many cases full-time. They get a living allowance, and we just haven't kept up. Our AmeriCorps seniors, for instance, when those programs were created back in the 1960s, AmeriCorps seniors' stipend was about 80% of minimum wage. Now it's 40%. So we're asking you to serve and house and feed yourself, and we just haven't kept up with what it costs. But I also worry a little bit about the anti-institutionalism of the next generation. There's this wonderful entrepreneurial mindset. I'm not worried about the next generation, right? Look how they showed up after George Floyd was killed, demanding changes to policies that are going to have an impact for years to come. I look at how they're showing up after the gun violence work. I look at how they're showing up on climate. So I'm not worried about the next generation. I'm kind of worried about us that run institutions. Are we building the kinds of institutions that the next generation wants to work in, or are they just going to work around us and we're going to become dinosaurs and irrelevant? And so that is one challenge that I look at. Another challenge is we co-release the Volunteering and Civic Life in America data with the U.S. Census Bureau every 2 years. And we recently released the data that covered the period during the pandemic. And for the first time ever, we saw a drop in the number of Americans that say they volunteer with a nonprofit organization formally on a regular basis. A 7% drop. We've never seen that in the 20 plus years that we've never seen any drop, nevertheless 7%. Now, some of that's not surprising given some nonprofits had to close their doors. People were concerned about their own safety. But given how need has gone up in the social sector, not having volunteers that are going to sustain I think we have to force ourselves to ask what's going on there. And we also know that volunteers oftentimes become a human capital pipeline. You start as a volunteer and then you end up serving and working in that organization and then running that organization one day. That same study, though, while there's challenge there, did show that the number of Americans that say that they volunteer informally on a regular basis, think during the pandemic, I went and got groceries for my elderly neighbor. I created a learning pod because my neighbor was a first responder or a grocery store worker. I went out and made sure the kids were playing safely, in the nearby field. That number stayed strong and steady and in some cases moved up. So when I think about the challenges, I do think we have to pause and say, what does civic engagement look like today? And are we providing this next generation the kind of opportunities that they're demanding with a more entrepreneurial spirit and an understandable concern about traditional institutions?
Michael, I'm glad you mentioned data because that was my next question is how do each of you use data in your work? And you mentioned the volunteering data, Michael. What about impact data? Do you work with your volunteers to help organizations measure impact, or how do they interact with data?
Impact is key. I think the secret sauce of AmeriCorps is we're not creating some one program in Washington, D.C. and trying to replicate it across the country. For those who's worked with AmeriCorps, raise your hand. It's everything from food banks to gun violence to learning loss to you name river cleanups, you name it. And so that's really important. But I think what's also as important, we can't be throwing pasta on the wall just to see what sticks. We have to know where we're heading. And that has not always been the case for AmeriCorps. My second introduction to the agency, I ran an Obama-era initiative called the Social Innovation Fund, which was giving nonprofit organizations that were working in low-income communities an opportunity to build their evidence while scaling at the same time. And I remember during that time doing a session for AmeriCorps grantees about this whole evidence thing. And I was like, no one's going to come. We were standing room only because they were beginning to understand that this was more and more funders were asking about this and what would this mean. And so today, AmeriCorps, 70% of our AmeriCorps grantees have strong or moderate levels of impact. So when you have an AmeriCorps member that's showing up in your community, they're not only showing up, but we know that they're going to have a transformative impact. And that didn't happen by accident. We required it in our notices of funding. We look at grantees who know how to do it. We provide research grants. We provide technical assistance. So we're working to bring our grantees along an evidence continuum. So not every AmeriCorps grantee is coming in with some sort of randomized controlled trial, quasi-experimental design, double-blind study, what have you. Let's start, with a pre-post test. Let's start with asking the question about what's your theory of change. So we're helping to bring you in and then moving you up that level of success. And we, on that evidence levels, and we release all sorts of impact studies all the time, but it is something that is incredibly important for us. And look, we have to go to Congress and we have to explain how we are spending that $1.4 billion a year. And I can't say, trust me.
Yeah.
Let me introduce you to AmeriCorps Grandma such and such. Isn't she great?
Yeah.
I have to show the data behind that.
Okay, great. Richie?
Likewise, data informs everything that we do. I mean, everything from understanding the communities that we're working in, really trying to understand ourselves as an organization. I think one of the things that's really interesting for a lot of nonprofits is that we tend to think about the impact of our work, but we don't always look at who we are as an organization and whether or not we are showing up the right way. So everything from knowing who our staff is, being able to understand the demographics of who's in our communities, who are our members, what communities we're in, who our partners are. We are definitely one of the types of organizations, or at least for me, my philosophy has been like, you want to go fast, go alone, right? They say that. You want to go far, you go together. And so being able to be in partnership and really thinking about what is the strategy, what impact do we want to have, and working backwards from where we want the result to be. And then as we go along, we try to figure out, okay, if we know that we're trying to move this certain demographic around an issue, or if we're trying to make sure that we have more voters turn out, if we're trying to see how many more voters we're trying to engage, how many people are showing up to community meetings. I mean, civic engagement is so important. You think about what we've seen, the attacks on learning, for example. We need to make sure that people are actually showing up, right? So even measuring, how many people do we have turning out for these events? Who are those individuals? Making all of that stuff, it goes back to data. And so being able to track data not only at the local and state level, but at the national level, so we can see collectively what our impact is. A lot of organizations, I think, do a really good job of telling a story, but being able to tell a story through data is that much more powerful because you can really then say, we did this. And, we're proud just some of the data that we collect, even around who's voting or who's coming to understand who's on their ballot. And being able to collect that, and millions of people coming to our website just to get basic voter information about candidates. And finding out, we found things that we didn't know about ourselves. We found out that we're the most trusted voting resource in the country. We had no idea, and that was but us doing internal polling, but also other organizations who share their data with us. And so they're looking at this list of organizations and saying, who are the organizations that you trust most to get information from? And the League ended up being the first one. It was actually recently noted in the Washington Post in an article, and we were just like, wow, we didn't even know that, right? So data is really critical and key to understand not only who you are, but make sure you're connecting with folks in a way that is meaningful to their lives. And so it's important to tell that story.
Great. Could be the elephant in the room, I guess, but I think a lot of folks' perception of the League of Women Voters might be outdated. That it's mostly white, mostly older women. I've been a member of the League off and on over many years. How are you addressing equity, and are you changing? Is the League of Women Voters a new organization from what it was 40, 50, 60 years ago?
Yeah, so we say we're not your grandmother's league anymore. And it's nice.
What do you have against my grandmother?
I want every grandmother to join. But that was something, I think this is the other thing. When you have a legacy institution like the League, we're almost 4 years old. It'll be 104 in February. Born out of the suffrage movement. And there is great history there, but there is also a not so great history. Like not every woman got the opportunity to vote when the law was won because of Jim Crow laws. And because of the segregation that existed in this country and the outright racism and brutality, right, of the Jim Crow era. And even organizations who may have thought they were doing good at times stayed complicit. And the League was one of those organizations early on that was complicit in that, we got enough, right? We don't want to push things too far. And so the League really had a moment several years ago where it looked in the mirror, and I call it the Snow White effect. We were no longer the fairest of them all. And the board, to their credit at the time, said, we have to decide whether or not we still deserve to be here and do this work. And so that was an intentional decision of the board to say we have got to center racial equity in everything that we do. And so when I came on board, it was very explicit and very intentional. And that, for me, as an organizer, was like, yes, now I can dig my hands in. And so we've been on this journey to not only diversify the organization, but that's not enough, because it can become very token-like, right? So you have to name the things. Looking at structures that exist within your organization, which ones no longer serve you well? How are we changing policies? How do we go about recruitment? How do we go about deciding staffing, right? Even just from an HR standpoint. Who's on staff? Who are our members? Who is in leadership in the organization? If you want to start with racial equity, you have to do a few things. One is tell the truth and understand your own history, and then figure out how do you make the structural changes internally. Because it's very easy, I would say, for organizations to point to all the racism that exists outside their organization, but to own it within your own is a hard thing.
Yeah.
And so we've been on this journey, and we're not perfect, but we are becoming. And I'm really proud of where we've come. Our membership has grown tremendously and also diversified more. The more that we have named the thing, the more people have felt welcome. The like me factor is now, do you have those same values that I hold and possess? And then creating a pipeline of leaders, because it's not just about racial diversity, it's also about youth.
Yeah.
There was a lot of elitism and ageism that existed within our organization, because people saw it just as an old white woman's organization. Yeah. And that is changing, and it is a great thing. And it also means that you lose control. Sometimes you have to be okay with losing control of your organization. You have to allow people to say the things, to be able to bring in new ideas, new energy. And we do something called PTR, preferences, traditions, and requirements. We question everything. Are we doing this because it's a preference, because somebody likes it done this way? Are we doing it because it's a tradition? The organization just always, that's the league way of doing things. I said, well, tell me this league way, because I don't understand it. Come to find out, it wasn't serving us well at all. And then really looking at requirements for success. And so that's where we've really focused our time and energy, at least since I've been here over the past 5 years, is just what are the requirements for success? If we truly want to be a country that is that has all people's voices represented, then we need to be an organization who does so as well.
Great. Michael, are you focusing on equity too?
Yeah, but I'm taking all sorts of mental notes. I want you to write an article about the Snow White effect. I just think that was so powerful. And where would we be as a social sector if we would all have the bravery to pull that mirror up? Some of us are hiding that mirror because we know if we put it up,
we want to see the wart on the nose.
We wouldn't like what we find. I remember I was working with a nonprofit that was doing digital divide work back when the digital divide was desktop computers. Some of you may not know what that is, and AOL accounts.
Floppy disk.
Right, exactly. And you know, the economy had shifted, and we weren't able to provide some of the services we could provide before. And so we did a study, and we looked at, this is how much it would cost each of our partners if they had to pay for our services. Would they pay for it? And they wouldn't. It didn't make sense. We sunset the organization. And I think our sector would be in a much better place if we would have those honest conversations. So I'm so grateful for your leadership. Yes, AmeriCorps is focusing on equity. Since you said grandma, I will say AmeriCorps is not your auntie's AmeriCorps, since we're only 30. You know, if you would have asked one of my predecessors 10 to 15 years ago about the demographic landscape for AmeriCorps, they might have had a lot of, not well, it could be. And I'm so proud that we have moved in a different direction. And so AmeriCorps, for instance, is now more ethnically diverse than the nation. You know, for instance, we're 22% African American. We're more than 18% Latinx or Hispanic. We are also more than 40% of AmeriCorps members come from families with low incomes. And so, but that's been a deliberate effort to make sure people realize that you can serve in your community, not just be served by someone who flies in to do this work. And so now if you go and you visit a City Year AmeriCorps program in D.C., more than half of those young people in the City Year program in D.C. are going to be from D.C., from Anacostia. And that's been a deliberate effort. Same for Teach for America, which is now more than 50% people of color, because we recognize that the people closest to the pain need to be closest to the power. And they want to see people that look like them that are wearing those red jackets or wearing that AmeriCorps A. And so it's been deliberate. It's also meant, however, though, we have to look at what are the barriers that exist. So I talk about living allowance. You know, in 1993, I was 13, so I wasn't there when the agency was created. But if I would have told my mother a few years later, my single mom, who struggled, actually took her 10 years to get her bachelor's degree. I watched her get her bachelor's degree. And if I would have told her, I'm going to join this AmeriCorps program, I'm probably going to have to get on food stamps, though, she would have looked at me like I was crazy. And so we're having to ask some honest questions about what is the investment we're making in members if we want AmeriCorps to reflect the diversity of the nation. So President Biden has called on Congress to raise the minimum living allowance to $15 an hour by 2025. It can be higher than that in certain regions, but that's huge. When I came in, our AmeriCorps Vista members were making less than $7 an hour. We don't give them housing. They have to provide their own housing. They have to feed themselves. And so those are the sorts of things that you have to look at. You have to look at transportation. You have to, look at skills training. So one of the things that we found when we talk about AmeriCorps as just a way to serve your community, that's fine. When we talk about AmeriCorps as something that's going to give you a livable living allowance so you can actually feed yourself and live while you do it, and you're going to get training, skills building, credentialing at the same time to give you a leg up in your career, then we see our recruitment numbers skyrocket. And so that's been a lot of the focus. For instance, we just launched a public health AmeriCorps program, $400 million from the Centers for Disease Control, who was looking at 80,000 there's 80,000 missing public health workers. And they saw AmeriCorps members showing up during the pandemic and said, can we do more here? Most workforce programs for CDC require a master's degree. We're like, no, you don't need that for some of these. So now 98% of public health AmeriCorps do not have master's degree. More than 50% don't have college degrees at all, and they are more diverse than the nation. And so if you're going to talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, you got to put your money where your mouth is, and you got to change your policies to make sure that you're opening those floodgates.
Great. I want to open it up for questions, but I've got one more myself, which is on technology. We've talked a lot today about technology and artificial intelligence for good and bad. Good effects, bad effects. How are you seeing technology affecting your organizations? Are you capitalizing on it? Are you struggling with it, Virginia?
So it's a double-edged sword, I would say. There are some amazing technologies out there. So we use something called outreach circles, which is white labeled as League in Action. It's a distributed organizing tool. It has been an amazing way for us. The pandemic actually did a really good job for us. And like one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that it forced us to really think strategically about how do we do outreach? How do we mobilize people in a pandemic? I mean, I don't know about anybody else. I remember when they announced it, somebody said, you need to dust off your pandemic plan. I was like, oh, I wasn't around in like the Spanish influenza. Like what? Yeah. So no, we have to create a pandemic plan. How are we going to do this? And so being able to use technology to still be able to do the work that was necessary and find workarounds when you couldn't be in the streets. We're the largest on-the-ground partner on National Voter Registration Day, meaning National Voter Registration Day, there are leagues all over the country registering people in person. We weren't able to do that during the pandemic. How are we going to do this? So being able to use technology to organize, to connect with people in a different way, being able to use social media in a different way. So all of those tools have been, for us, great. What we do fear, though, is that there will be a new digital divide with AI and with emerging technologies. And so we are now working really hard to figure out what the benefits could be, not trying to be fearful, although we know that there are deep fake videos when it comes to political ads, mis and disinformation, and things that will impact us. And so for us, it requires a hyper level vigilance, I would say, in fact-checking, in making sure that information that people are getting is accurate, that they're getting real information from real people. And then also making sure that as we do different types of analysis of legislation and everything else, the AI opens up an entire world of, I wouldn't say, making life easier, right? You can do deep analysis of long documents. You can do all kinds of things. But how much of that is accurate? And then the other thing is original thought. We don't want legislation written by a computer. We know that, as we think about how the country needs to move forward, there always needs to be a human touch, because the most logical thing that a computer may identify as the solution may not be the human or humane thing. And so we're struggling with all of those challenges and really trying to think through, not just as the league, but this is a conversation that the civil rights community is having, because ultimately we know that time and time again, the civil rights impacts of emerging technology always tend to leave certain demographics behind. And so how do we, A, remain in the forefront, but also making sure that the people who will be most disproportionately impacted negatively, potentially, are front and center, but also the people who will be able to take advantage of the financial opportunities that come from new and emerging technologies, that our folks aren't left behind. I know, like my family is a Spanish-speaking person. Even when we see information in the way that it's shared nowadays, there are not the same level, there's not the same level of watchdogness, I don't know what the right word is, but in Spanish, right?
Oversight.
Spanish language media, and where people get their news from is not the same as traditional media. And so we need to make sure that communities, regardless of language, regardless of race, regardless of income, all have that access. And that's an area that we're really focused on and concerned about, but also excited about, because there is opportunity if we make sure that we are there and in the room and having those conversations. And we have sharp elbows, so we'll make sure that we're there.
Great.
Hear, hear. I mean, I think what I've heard from you, that is the same for me, is that we can't be afraid of new technologies. We have to be vigilant. We have to realize that every new technology comes with a potential challenge, that time and time again, they often do marginalize the people that are already marginalized. And so we have to be at the front lines of it. But we also have to see how those technologies can be used to really support communities of color, low-income communities. And so, I'm not afraid of it, but very, very concerned. I would say for AmeriCorps, I think about technology in two ways. One is how are AmeriCorps members and grantees using it? And that comes up in lots of different ways. One, we just launched an American Connection Corps with Leaders for America and Comcast, which is working on digital navigations to make sure that folks are connected to broadband and other technologies across the country, especially our seniors who are being victimized in so many different ways. So we're using the boots on the ground that are AmeriCorps to make sure that we are making sure our folks in underserved communities aren't left behind. I think about, we launched a program 10 years ago with FEMA called FEMA Corps. After Hurricane Sandy, FEMA came to us and said, hey, we saw these AmeriCorps members that were really kicking butt and helping in big ways. We need that. So we launched FEMA Corps, where FEMA gets to deploy AmeriCorps teams where they're needed most. They've actually hired 25% of our AmeriCorps alums over the past 10 years. The last graduating class, 70% of them got job offers. But FEMA Corps members introduced the ideas of taking iPads around with you to register people after disaster, instead of trying to bring them back to a computer or fill out forms that had needed to be inputted afterwards. And so I think about that level of technology. I think about a woman, Grammy Fran, who I met in Maine. We run the foster grandparents programs. And so Grammy Fran said to me, our principal emailed us when the pandemic hit and said, you have to go home, and I don't know when you're coming back. And she said, I won't be away from my kids. I refuse. And so Grammy Fran taught herself how to use an iPad. She then taught all of her other foster grandparents how to use an iPad, and they stayed critical connectors in Maine throughout the pandemic. And so I think about it ways like that. I also think about how we're using it as an agency. We are using technology, our e-grant system, and our member portal. How many of you know what Internet Explorer is? Okay, all right. In other rooms, I might have fewer hands. So this summer, our member portal, where you have to sign up to apply to be an AmeriCorps member, log your hours, all that sorts of things, it only worked on Internet Explorer. Do you know what happened this summer? Microsoft finally sunset Internet Explorer for the 5 people that were still using it. They were all AmeriCorps members. And so we were so behind on technology. So we have been investing a lot of money to make sure that we're modernizing our systems, because that also connects to equity. The number of AmeriCorps members who said to me, I almost stopped. I almost didn't continue that application process because it was so difficult. It was so buggy. And so we're making sure that our technologies are going to open us up to folks who want to be a part of the AmeriCorps family, and our financial management systems, the grants management systems, because a lot of those things, when you're a smaller BIPOC-led organization, you're in a tribal community, you're in a rural community, and having broken technology systems is a big stop sign saying, don't come here.
Yep.
And we have to make sure that we invest the time, the money, into systems and people that will make this work easier for folks that are going to be a part of our organizations.
Awesome. Great. Questions? Yes. Here comes the mic.
Thank you so much. Amazing discussion. So my name is Oscar Romero. I am the CIO of the New York City Civic Engagement Commission, and a couple of questions about technology. I'm really concerned, when we can try to diversify how we think about the organizations that we run, but when most of the technology companies are literally built on racist, classist, sexist frameworks, it puts a dent in our programming if we just implement technologies, right? So particularly wondering, how are you leveraging your organizations and the budgets of your organizations to actively challenge these technology companies versus being consumers of the products, right? So just curious to hear about your strategies.
Well, one of the things I will say, the reason I like outreach circles, and this goes back to like how we're centering racial equity in our work, it is an immigrant-led organization. And it is one that worked with us to build the app the way that we needed it to work. And that was one thing that was really important. The other way, pushing back, I think, in this, again, this is at the intersection of racial equity and technology. How are you holding them accountable? How are you selecting vendors? We are very particular about how we're selecting vendors, what policies they have. Do they have people of color on their boards? Who is leading? Who is leading the project? All of those things are important for us, and that's one of the things from a civil rights standpoint, I think, that we need to make sure. It's not that we're saying we don't want to work with these other companies. What we're saying is that, no, you have to work for us, because as a customer and as a client, we have these expectations. And so for us, it's been flipping the script, so to speak, on how we expect those companies to show up. And if you're not showing up in a way for us that is acceptable, then we're just not going to work with you. And I think that's a broad consensus among a lot of groups in the civil rights space, at least, holding those companies accountable. And we have private meetings with companies at times about the way that they're using, because we don't want to just, let me backtrack. We push companies. I also think it's important that we are investing collectively as organizations in BIPOC-led organizations, specifically technology companies, and media and other places. Two of my friends just got major funding to buy a lot of Spanish language media. I don't know, you might have worked with Stephanie in the Obama
Valencia?
administration. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Stephanie and Jess Morales Roqueto, they just were able to buy a bunch of small Spanish language stations around the country. And they're incorporating new technology, and they're thinking about what is this going to be? What will this look like in the future? And so I think for us, it's not only about making sure that we're investing in companies, but making sure that we're supporting those companies, and then also supporting startup organizations who are investing in technology. And so that's, for us, the best way to do that. Rather than I have no desire to be in a fight with some of these companies all day, because my fight right now is making sure that every person can vote, that this democracy stays. And so part of that is me saying, and us saying collectively, we're not going to spend our money with you. We just won't spend our money with you. If you are not going to do the things that we need, and you are not going to be accountable and inclusive, then we don't need to waste our time with you. Mm-hmm. And they feel the pain eventually. Look at what happens, the divestment from now X, the X formerly known as Twitter. We see that happening, right? Where more and more people are choosing not to use the technology. And now we also have companies who are choosing not to use them to market. They're not because you have to have some kind of an accountability. So that would be my long answer to that question.
I think that CEO had some choice words yesterday on that subject. Google it. For AmeriCorps, we're a federal agency focused on civic engagement, so we are not doing anything to actively confront any companies. I would say the way that I think about this, though, I think AmeriCorps' radical vision and mission is changing the faces of all sorts of sectors. The 1.3 million alum that we now have, that are in corporate America, that are in the White House, that are in Congress. There are now partnerships with Deloitte, for instance, and Comcast that are moving AmeriCorps members directly into those companies. So how do we take community-minded change makers and give them opportunities to not only serve in the social sector, but to realize that change happens everywhere? That's when change the face, change the people that are controlling the power. And that's what I'm excited about, not only for AmeriCorps, but the civic engagement field as a whole.
Other questions?
Can I just thank the sign language interpreters here? Because you all are doing an amazing job. Like, that is some work, so thank you.
Yes, Michael. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, Michael, thank you very much for your good work, and it's lovely to see you again. Thank you. So, AmeriCorps has an important role to play, not only specifically as it relates to volunteerism, but, and while volunteerism is a powerful form of civic engagement, it's obviously not the only form of civic engagement. And so talk about AmeriCorps' relationship to the field, if you will. Yeah. I know you're very knowledgeable of the field, and if you'd talk about that relationship, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
So I think AmeriCorps really helps to create this path from charity to justice. So I think folks that start off as AmeriCorps members, I think of the City Year member, the Teach for America member, the Math Corps, Reading Corps member. Kristen Campbell, exactly, who runs PACE, Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement. There is some spark that happens through service, whether it's AmeriCorps or you're just going with your mom or dad on a regular basis to a food bank, that allows you to understand your community, to own the challenges and opportunities in community, to see people that you might not see on a regular basis. That creates a desire and a spark that leads you from maybe wanting to serve soup or hand out coats to being someone who actually wants to write policy that gets to the systemic challenges that are causing people to be hungry or homeless in the first place. And so it is not just a nice thing. It's a central part of our democracy that helps to create that muscle. I think another thing, Jen Leschnauer is here, who is our bridging fellow. So this natural thing that happens with AmeriCorps is it allows you to serve with people across differences. And you hear the stories all the time. There's, a young woman from Iowa who may have never met a black person in their lives, and she's now serving with a black woman from DC. They're fast friends. They're at each other's wedding a few years later. They've changed the conversations in their whole family. And that was just a side impact of AmeriCorps. And so now, coming out of last year's White House's United We Stand Summit, AmeriCorps is really being set up as a key tool to help bridge divides, to decrease polarization, to increase social cohesion. So we're doing all sorts of new research to better understand what is that secret sauce? Why does it seem that there is something about volunteering and serving together that's better than other interactions? We're going to be funding pilots for programs like the Selma Center for Truth, Nonviolence, and Reconciliation, where AmeriCorps, that's their primary goal, working on this sort of thing. And we're already starting a pilot, for instance, on providing bridge building training to AmeriCorps members, regardless of where you're serving, so that when you are in your community, you can become a tool to help bring people together across difference. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tarsi Dunlop. I'm with the German Marshall Fund with their Cities program. And you already answered part of this question, so maybe I'm just going to ask you if you can expand on it at all. In terms of the impact that the program and the experience has on individuals, and some of these pilots and the research that you're going to be doing moving forward, one of the things that we're starting to see is that younger generations are growing disenchanted with democracy as a system, and I'm curious if any of the research that you might be looking into looks at how AmeriCorps as an experience helps shapes young people's attitudes towards democracy as a system, as an experience, and whether it could possibly help build support for people who participate in it.
Yes, so we've got some great data, and if you see me after, I'd be happy to share some, or Jen, raise your hand. She could probably share as well. So one of the things, for instance, we know AmeriCorps members are more likely to be civically engaged after their service. We actually recently did a study looking at the 2016 and 2020 elections and showed that AmeriCorps members were 2 times more likely to vote, younger coming out of their AmeriCorps experience than their peers. So what this means for long-term civic engagement is incredible. And then, of course, we have several members of Congress that are AmeriCorps alum, like Senator Heinrich and Fetterman and Gwen Moore. We have several mayors that are AmeriCorps alum. And so there is something about people who have that desire to want to serve in a significant way, but also something about those service experiences that are indeed formative. But we have some good data that we could share.
Earlier, we talked about a democracy mapping program that we're doing that counts up to now 10,000 organizations working around the country toward improving democracy. And we think that's only the tip of the iceberg. We think there are many more, actually. And just an appeal to folks here and to you, and maybe a response. Next year, there's an election. And from a very nonpartisan basis, maybe those 10,000 organizations along, and I know that you're part of that 10,000, could make sure that everyone votes. Is this something that AmeriCorps, the League of, you guys always do this, but I mean, you mentioned that twice as many in your cohort had voted. And research says that if you encourage someone else to vote, you're more likely to vote yourself. Can we mobilize the volunteers here and all the organizations to encourage people not just to vote, but to participate in democracy?
AmeriCorps statute does not, I see a member of my staff in the back. AmeriCorps statute does not allow AmeriCorps members to work on any sort of voter mobilization or registration. It was something that was litigated by Congress and comes up every now and again, and it's a pretty firm position. What AmeriCorps members do on their off time and how they choose to be civically engaged after they get fired up and ready to serve is up to them.
Well, let me ask you, I know you work on physical infrastructure. What about civic infrastructure? I mean, are a lot of AmeriCorps workers already working in the field in terms of, getting people engaged in volunteering and I mean, can we leverage the 200,000 to get other people involved as well?
And then we should ask Virginia some questions. No, absolutely. So AmeriCorps is not just about AmeriCorps members. We lead the president's call to service, and we are responsible for trying to foster an ethos of service in this country. So we run the Martin Luther King Day of Service. We run the 9/11 Day of Service. We have the Volunteer Generation Fund, where any organization can apply to us for funding to help manage volunteers, because that's really hard work. It doesn't just happen, as all of you know. Most of our AmeriCorps programs actually require our AmeriCorps members to go out and find other volunteers. But, for instance, after Hurricane Katrina, in the 10 years after Hurricane Katrina, we had 40,000 AmeriCorps members that were serving in Louisiana and Mississippi, and they engaged hundreds of thousands more. AmeriCorps is this incredible force multiplier that exists, and that is a part of our DNA. I also think, our largest footprint for AmeriCorps is in the schools. We have over 50,000 AmeriCorps members and foster grandparents serving in more than 10,000 schools across the country. We just launched with the Department of Education and Everyone Graduate Center at Johns Hopkins, the National Partnership for Student Success, which is working to get 250,000 more supports, supporting learning loss, tutors, mentors, post-secondary coaches that are working in that school. We launched that last year, and we were just with the Secretary of Education last month to say we got 187,000. So AmeriCorps is working really hard to build that civic infrastructure. And it will not only be for the year or two that they serve, we are seeing it turning into a lifetime of service.
Awesome. Well, we know this is your mission, but are there new aspects that are coming up that help to leverage more folks to participate?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things, though, I just want to, for anybody here and for everybody that we speak to, the most important thing is to have a voting plan and making sure that we ask everyone, find 10 people, whether it's your family members, whomever, and if every single one of us found 10 people, not only to vote, but also to have a voting plan. And that means making it celebratory, making it joyful. One of the things that I really struggle with, people make it seem like it's just a duty. It's not just a duty. This is the most patriotic thing that anybody, and I'm very angry in many ways that so many people have taken and bastardized the word patriotism. The most patriotic thing we can do is to exercise our right to vote. People died for that right. Right? And so as we look at it, this is something joyful. We honor our ancestors. We honor each one of our family members who came before us, and we can create the kind of country that we want. And so we have to make this a joyful experience. And so by doing that and being able to encourage others to do the same thing, so whether it's a family celebration, whether it is we go all vote early together, or we fill out our ballots at the table together and then we have some kind of a celebratory dinner, we make it a community experience, whatever those things are that you can do to make it feel festive. This is something that we should enjoy. So many countries don't have the opportunity to do this. And so that is one of the things for us, that we try to make voting a joyful and celebratory experience. Also having people engage civically in the voting process. We are also one of the largest recruiters of poll workers in the country, and so getting people to be engaged in doing election work. All election work doesn't mean sitting there on election day, right? You can be the person who is behind the scenes counting the ballots. You can be helping your election administrators. There's so many different ways to engage with your local elections officials to be able to be part of that voting experience. And so we really are looking, again, and it's not just the league alone. We work with Power the Polls. We work with the National Voter Registration Day folks. We work in coalition with partners around the country. And so I would also say, if your organization is not part of Power the Polls, if you're not signed up to do National Voter Registration Day, if you're not working with your local elections officials, find a way to connect in, because there are opportunities. And really, again, because that chilling effect has really taken hold in many places of the country, we need people more now than ever. There are senior citizens who stopped doing poll work during COVID. And they never went back. And we had to engage young people. We have more young people, high school seniors, people who are new to, in college and everything else. It is a great opportunity to start building a new pipeline of individuals to be civically engaged in our democracy in a way that can be, again, fun and joyful and an experience, and really allows us to dictate and control, not people who are trying to disrupt and do harm. We can disrupt in a really powerful way that is good for our country. And that's what we're looking for.
It's an awesome finish. We're fighting not only apathy these days, but also, forces that discourage some folks from getting involved. So appreciate your extra efforts on that. And Michael, really cool. And we have one more session after a 15-minute break. Thank you.